Today we're going to look at mastering the Vienna game by going over a game of one of the old great masters, a legend of the game, former world champion Alexander Alekhine, one of the great attacking players and really the model for much of Garry Kasparov's chess. And he was known as one of the first great positional attacking chess players. This game was played many years ago, over 100 years ago, yet it is very educational, particularly if you play the Vienna opening or play against it. Let's jump right in. Alekhine has white. His opponent is a man named Gregory. E4, E5, and knight to C3, the key move defining the opening as the Vienna. Knight to F6 and bishop to C4, knight C6 and D3. And this opening, you can also get into it via the bishop's opening, is still played today very commonly. It's a very common position. Bishop to B4, very standard defense. Alekhine plays the move bishop to G5. That's not so common these days. Knight GE2 is really the main move so that black can play D5 quickly, and usually they play it right away. After pawn takes, knight takes castles, bishop to E6. White will usually continue with bishop takes knight, bishop takes, and then F4, using that F pawn, trying to use it as a battering ram on the king's side. But Alekhine plays bishop to G5, knight to D4, moving the same piece twice in the opening. Probably wouldn't see that today. A3 hitting the bishop, and bishop takes C3, pawn takes. So he has given white the advantage of the two bishops. And this pawn at C3 is actually well placed. It kicks the knight from the D4 square and adds to white's control of the center. The knight goes to E6, hitting the bishop on G5. But instead of retreating the bishop, Alekhine plays H4, defending that bishop. He could take on E6, and after queen F3, G3, he's putting a lot of pressure on E5, but he decides to play the more aggressive move, H4. Now here, black does not want to take that bishop. There's a really cool tactic here. Watch this. After pawn takes, if the knight retreats back to G8, then G6. And look at the pins. There's a pin on the diagonal here from F4 to G8, and also down the H file. Both pawns are pinned. That would be big trouble for black. So he plays H6, kicking the bishop back. The bishop goes to D2, D6, queen to F3, bishop to D7. And here, Alekhine plays a very modern move. This is the kind of move you see in today's top chess, G4. We see this all the time in modern chess. He's playing it. He hasn't castled yet, but he's beginning to put pressure on the king's side. Queen to E7. His opponent basically clears the back rank so that his king can castle on either side of the board, but I doubt very seriously he wants to castle on the king's side. G5 was played immediately. The knight goes back to G8. Now rook to B1. Placing the rook on the half-open file, putting some pressure on B7. So bishop to C6 defends that pawn, influences the center. Knight to H3, king to D7, and queen to G4. He decides to not castle, but play the king to D7. But the queen on G4 is quite powerful, pitting the knight on E6 and aiming at the king. Rook to F8 is played by Alekhine's opponent. You think he wants to maybe liberate his position with F5, but you can already see his pieces are very poorly placed. Alekhine plays F4, breaking in the center, trying to open up the F file, and he's just basically committed to leaving his king in the middle of the board. Both kings are in the center right now. And here, the best move from black was probably H5, hitting the queen and pushing it away from this very dangerous diagonal. White still, of course, clearly better, but that's a little safer than what was played in the game. He played the aggressive F5. And what black was counting on is this pin along the C6 to H1 diagonal. But as it turns out, that pin is not that big of a problem because the rook at H1 isn't participating in the game so much right now. So Alekhine goes ahead and takes on F5, allowing the capture of that rook. But he retakes the knight. He received a pawn and a minor piece for the exchange, but also he's opened up a lot of lines against his opponent's king. The king goes to C8, trying to find some refuge on the queen side, but here Alekhine plays this powerful move, the double attack, queen to G1, hitting the bishop at H1 and aiming at the A7 square. And if the queen were to capture A7, that would be it, because this pawn controls this flight square. So if the queen were to land on A7, it's over. So he plays C6. He can't retreat the bishop, basically, because that would be the end of the game after queen to A7. So C6 is played. He knows he has to give up that bishop. but Alekhine ignores it. He goes after the king. Queen takes a7, and he's threatening queen to a8 check, and then the capture of the b7 pawn with the rook, which, of course, would win the queen. So that's a big problem. c5 is played by Gregory so that this bishop can defend the b7 pawn. d4, opening up lines in the center where his own king resides, but what he really wants to do is put this pawn on d5 and cut the communication of this bishop from the queen side. Queen goes to c7, and now d5, doing exactly that. And now this bishop cannot reach the b7 pawn. Knight to e7 is played, piling on the pawn on d5. But here, Alekhine has a very nice tactic. Do you see the move? That's right. Rook takes b7. Probably not the only winning move in the position, but a very strong one. And then after queen takes b7, bishop to a6, pinning the queen to the king. The bishop takes on d5, but then another very strong move from Alekhine, c4. And the idea is, obviously, he would like to push the bishop away from its defense of the queen. But if the bishop were to, say, play bishop to c6, then after bishop to a5, it is mate in one, and there is nothing black can do to stop it. Literally nothing. The threat of queen to a8, mate. And the queen could not capture the queen because it's pinned by the bishop at a6. And if queen takes bishop, queen c7, mate. So this would be a forced mate in one in that position. So he goes ahead after c4 and takes with the queen. After queen takes bishop, bishop b7, queen d6. And we can see white is dominating. We go through a couple more moves here. Pawn takes, and then f5. He has this nice collection of pawns, but after rook takes f5, queen d7, king b8, e7, rook f7, and the game went on a few more moves, but obviously after promoting, that would be the end of the game. After queen to d7 check, we don't look any further. A really well-played game from Alekhine with a lot of modern ideas and some real insight into the Vienna game. I hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Bye.